Hello everyone, I'm Trix, and today I want to talk about a manga called Asuperu Kanojo. It's also called That's My Atypical Girl. The tags for the series are drama, psychological, romance, seinen, slice of life, and I would say also that it's rather dark in parts, especially with how the content. There are 76 chapters and it is complete. The author is Hagimoto Souhachi and the artist is Morita Renji. It was completed last year and it started in 2018. It is published by Koshanda Comics and serialized in Comic Days. It's also licensed in English, but only digitally, by Koshanda USA, 12 volumes, and IKNR. There are scanlations out there if you don't want to read the official translation. The differences are rather small, so you're not going to miss a lot. Fan translation does use some of the Chinese translations after chapter 27, so be aware of that if you are reading that version. Let's talk about the manga itself. This manga deals with disability, and mainly mental disabilities. The disability that it majority deals with is some sort of autism. It's never officially said what she has. The main character, Megumi Sato, never says what she has, and the other character, Yuki, also has a disability, but again, it never really confirms what he has. It even does less with his disability than it does with hers. The manga itself deals with Megumi's struggles in real life and how a person's disability affects themselves and those around them. It is a rather dark story and it is a rather hard read, especially for those who want to avoid stories that include self-harm, stories that include abuse or bullying, or stories that include assault. There is one part that involves an animal abuse, which it doesn't explain why it happens, but it does happen. So if you're not a fan of that, this might not be the story for you. The artwork. In the beginning, the characters, Megumi and Yuki, are drawn in a certain way. Megumi's drawn very sallowly and her eyes are almost completely black, whereas Yuki's eyes do have some life in them. That changes and almost reverses towards the end of the manga. Megumi's condition in the beginning is rather harsh, and she's basically just walked out of her family home and gone 8 hours away to another place to meet the author of a manga that she likes. This manga describes a bullying event that she resonates with, and the author, Yuki, is stunned about her turning up on his doorstep, as you would be. This demonstrates, in my thoughts, impulse control. Now, some people with disabilities do suffer from this, and it does display this really, really well as time goes on. But as time goes on, Megumi really does a stellar job of learning to control it. As the manga progresses, you can see the reasons behind Megumi's, let's say, lack of education regarding her disability and how she was affected in school, how she was affected in her childhood by her parents, how her father's neglect and her mother's indifference to that neglect affected the reasons of her doing what she does. At some points it goes into almost intricate detail of how disabled people are ignored by society, how they're treated by society, how people will talk behind their back, and how people will not understand that we could never be normal. Now, if you're not familiar, I do have some disabilities, both physical and mental, and this manga resonates on a personal level. That's why I'm covering it. I will be covering a few other mangas that deal with disability, but this one I wanted to start with because it's perhaps the darkest of them out there that I've read so far. The events in this manga mainly deal with the drama of Megumi and her reactions to various stimuli. For example, there was a part in a bathhouse where she lashes out at someone because they bump into her. There is another part where she lashes out at a person, Yuki, because he doesn't do as she says, physically, and she hits him. And now this event repeats itself later on, and she almost basically breaks herself because of it. But this is something that I think it does really well. But saying that, there is another scene in the manga itself that deals with her having a panic attack. This happens quite early on in the manga, and the authors, I should say the artist, art progresses as time goes on, but it does really not convey in words or illustration what a panic attack is like. And that, unfortunately, is probably its weakest part, and I almost dropped it at a point that comes later with an animal, and while the animal survives and nothing really happens to it, really bothered me that that part was included. Yes, the reasonings behind it are explained, and I might have gone over this before, but I think it's very important to say that there are parts of the manga that are extremely hard to read, even for someone like I've read a lot of grim stuff, and this was taking the cake, to be honest. That part was. In the end, Megumi almost becomes more of a person, and Yuki, or Yoki, depending on how it's translated in the rules, basically shrinks. His health becomes worse. Her ability to do more increases. She even basically starts to contribute into society, which is, I think, it's almost like saying if you have someone behind you, you can do anything, but that's not exactly true. The reasoning behind her going into the workforce is rather, it's like glossed over. Like, you can see that she wants to help out, and you can see that she wants to do more, and you can see that Yuki's basically unable to work at some point because of his health and his, his depression and stuff. But, like, I'm not sure what message it wants to say here. It's like the two people become reliant on each other, but one is almost like a vampire on the other in some regards, and it doesn't really have a good message at that point, and really bothered me that, I didn't understand what it was trying to say, and the author's notes in the end don't really mention it, especially, because the ending feels almost abrupt, because it goes from one arc where they were dealing with a bullying event, and the childhood bully is getting, like, their comeuppance, but it also goes into, like, another arc, but it doesn't complete it. It's just like, oh, everything's okay, she wants to live now, she's not as depressed, she doesn't harm as much. That's it, and that annoyed me. Right, lastly, I just want to talk about the last part of the author's notes in the final volume, in volume 12, where he says that he wants to create a story about a person with disabilities, not a story about disabilities. The story does that in some regards, but it also, I think, in my personal opinion, as someone with disabilities, your mileage may vary, is that it doesn't really do this. It wants to, really badly, but it doesn't really do this. It is worth reading if you want an insight, I guess, into disabilities in some regards, but I think it fails to describe the sheer isolation that you have, especially if you are in, like, education, or like normal education, or even if you're in special school like I was at points. No one understands, because sometimes you're in a point where you understand that you have disabilities, you're never going to be normal, and your life is going to be extremely hard, and then you have another point where they just bully you for it, and they don't understand, they don't want to understand, they think you're different, they're scared of you in some regards, they hate you in another type of regards, and you'll never not face that. It doesn't do anything to address that. It just thinks, like, if you can sue them, your life will be better, you'll get a bit of money, and that'll be it. But things don't work out that way. Okay, it's fiction, and fiction does a lot of weird things, and there are points that it feels over-dramatized, especially with their reactions to, say, bugs, and in some regard, or her whacking or smacking Yuki twice, once because she lacks any impulse control and she wants him to do as she says, and another point where she just overreacts to something really, really stupid. Yes, she beats herself up about it, but, it just feels like you wanted to create the impact of the first event again, and you failed. Again, mileage may vary. In conclusion, you are welcome to pick this up if you want, or not. I can't recommend it, but I could also recommend it if you want to, like, read, I guess, drama or stories about disabilities. There are better ones out there, such as My Silent Voice, such as Josie and the Fish, which are much better and much light-hearted. This is the first of 3 or 4 manga that I will be covering about disabilities. Thank you all for your time. I'm Trix, and, well, bye-bye.